December 1944. Ardennes Forest. 4:13 a.m. The cold is absolute. Not sharp, but crushing, heavy, merciless. The kind that eats through wool and skin and bone, leaving only numbness and the metallic taste of fear. Snow falls in slow, soundless sheets, swallowing the landscape and everything that moves within it. It is not the soft snow of postcards or holidays. It is the hard, wind-driven snow of war, the kind that blinds, suffocates, and buries the dead where they fall. The darkness is nearly perfect. The moon has hidden behind clouds thick as stone, leaving only the faintest bluish glow reflecting off frozen drifts. Trees stand as black silhouettes, skeletal and motionless, their branches heavy with ice. Every trunk looks like an execution post. Every gust of wind sounds like breath. Nothing human moves. Nothing human speaks. The forest is holding its breath. Somewhere deep within that silent maze of pine and frost stands one man, a U.S. Army Ranger, cut off from his unit. He stands alone. His boots sink into the crusted snow with each slow step, the sound muffled by the thick frozen air. His breath steams outward in ragged bursts, rising and dissolving like smoke from a gun barrel. Frost has turned his eyebrows and eyelashes white, clinging to his skin like ash. His face is streaked with grime and dried blood, not from defeat, but from the long night behind him. His helmet sits low, rim coated with ice. The chin strap rubs raw against his face. His fingers grip the cold steel of his M1 Garand, knuckles pale and stiff as the stock merges with his frozen gloves. His entire world has shrunk to a series of deliberate movements. Step, stop, listen, step, stop, listen. He had been part of a reconnaissance patrol at dusk the night before, moving forward under radio silence to locate German armor rumored to be massing beyond the ridgeline. But then the storm rolled in, a blizzard that erased tracks, swallowed sound, and tore formations apart like paper. Visibility collapsed to less than 10 feet. The wind smothered every voice. And then the artillery began, distant at first, then swelling into a roar that shook the snow loose from the trees. Shells lit the night in white fire, turning the forest into a convulsing theater of shadows and splintering wood. Units scattered. Lines broke. Call signs vanished into the storm. When the shelling finally died down, silence returned, deeper and thicker than before. He found himself alone. Now, hours later, he does not know if his squad is dead, captured, or simply too far away to reach. The radio is frozen, useless. Compass needles jerk and wobble from the interference of nearby metal wreckage. Landmarks are buried. The sky gives no direction. The world has narrowed to instinct and training. The ranger halts again, closing his eyes, letting his hearing stretch into the forest. He listens past the wind, past the creak of trees bending under ice, past the pounding of his own pulse in his skull. Nothing but the long inhale and exhale of winter. Then a sound, distant, faint, a mechanical clank carried by the wind. Not American. He freezes, breath suspended. Another sound, boots, many boots, trampling snow in unison. The muted rattle of metal equipment. Low voices speaking German. He opens his eyes. The darkness ahead is no longer empty. Across the white field that opens between the trees, ghost-like shapes begin to appear, silhouettes emerging from the storm, row after row. A column of German infantry, stretching far into the tree-line. Hard helmets, long coats, rifles slung across backs, MG-42s resting on shoulders. Snow coats their uniforms, turning them ghost pale. They advance in disciplined formation, stepping with slow confidence, unaware that they are being watched. The ranger counts automatically, silently. 12, 20, 35, one group after another crossing into view. A full platoon at least, possibly two. And then more shapes appear. 2 sled-mounted heavy machine guns. Radio operators burdened with equipment. A field medic moving with a stretcher team. Officers clustered under a white signal flag. Not a patrol, a force on the move, headed directly toward the valley and the American supply route below. He swallows hard, throat burning from the cold. He does not move. He does not blink. He watches the line stretch into the distance, disappearing into the storm. This is no random intersection. This is a spearhead of the German offensive, part of the surprise push that would soon shake the world. The Battle of the Bulge. Behind that formation, somewhere deeper in the fog, engines growl. Tracked vehicles. Armor. An offensive is unfolding. A river of men and steel flowing toward the thin American lines holding the Ardennes. He knows what will happen if they pass unchallenged. The valley below will fall. Communications will collapse. Supplies will vanish. Units already stretched thin will break. The German wedge will punch through and roll west with unstoppable momentum. More will die. Many more. He glances down the slope. There are no friendlies in sight. No reinforcements. No fallback. No time. He is one man, alone with a freezing rifle and a few steel clips of ammunition. He breathes slowly, letting the fear settle into something harder and sharper. Rangers are trained for isolation, trained to operate in the dark, behind enemy lines, cut off from command, trained to act when there is no one else left to act. He kneels in the snow. His body moves without thought, habits carved in a bone by years of training. He wipes frost from the barrel, tests the action, loads a clip with a metallic click that sounds like finality. He scans the terrain, the curve of the slope, the rocks half buried in ice, the fallen tree at his flank. He calculates angles, distances, silhouettes, movement patterns, wind direction and speed, north-northwest, strong enough to knife breath sideways. Visibility, minimal, advantage to the still and hidden. Probability of survival, negligible. He exhales through clenched teeth, forming a cloud that drifts slowly upward like smoke from a mortar tube. If he waits, if he hides, if he runs, nothing changes. War is a ledger, and he knows the numbers. He sets his sights on the lead officer's helmet. Steel front sight steady. Trigger settling under a freezing finger. The officer stops to raise binoculars. The formation slows. A single heartbeat passes, then another. He squeezes the trigger. The rifle cracks, a flat, brutal explosion against the frozen air. The recoil slams into his shoulder like the hammer of a forge. The sound rips through the forest, bouncing off ice and stone, magnified by the valley walls. Birds erupt from branches in frantic wings. Snow cascades from trees. The officer collapses instantly, binoculars tumbling into the snow with a dull metallic chime. For a moment, a breath, the forest is paralyzed. No one moves. No one speaks. Even the wind pauses. Then the Germans react. Shots break out. Commands cut across the ranks like whips. Men drop to the ground, scrambling for cover, rifles snapping into position. Others scatter, diving behind the lip of the ridge. Machine gun teams swing heavy barrels into motion, scanning the tree line through blinding snow. The Ranger cycles another round. Another shot. Another figure drops. Now the response comes like an avalanche. Muzzle flashes erupt down the line. Bullets shredding the snow around him, smacking into trees with explosive pops, tearing bark and ice into splinters that cut his face with tiny invisible knives. Whole branches snap and crash to the ground. The forest becomes a cage of ricochets and whistling metal. He does not retreat. He presses lower, breath harsh and fast, rifle bucking into his shoulder again and again. Every shot must count. Every second is borrowed. He shifts 2 feet to the left, knowing they will target the muzzle flash. He tracks shapes, not faces. Movement, not fear. He hears the scream of an MG-42 spooling up, a roar like tearing sheet metal. Snow vaporizes where rounds stitch the ground, crawling closer. He rolls hard behind a fallen pine, bullets shredding the wood, just inches from his skull. He feels the vibration of each impact through the frozen bark. He loads again. 8 rounds. 8 lives. He waits for the barrel to shift. 1 breath. 2. He rises, fires, drops again. Another German falls. The formation hesitates. Confusion breaks discipline. He hears the officers yelling, commanding flanking maneuvers, hand signals slicing the air. They expect a squad. They expect dozens. They cannot understand why only 1 rifle fires. The storm thickens, reducing visibility further. The snow now works against the Germans, hiding him completely whenever he goes still. He wipes blood from his cheek with the back of his glove. Not from a wound, from a splinter of wood that sliced skin. He pulls a grenade from his belt, feeling the cold steel sting his palm. He pulls the pin with his teeth and throws. The explosion punches through the storm like thunder, shockwave kicking snow into the air. Shouts follow. Fear grows. Doubt spreads like fire through dry grass. He breathes once more, steadying himself. This stand cannot be won. It is not meant to be. It is meant to delay, to confuse, to fracture momentum, to buy time. 1 man against 200. The battle intensifies, and something begins to break, not in him, but in them, because now the Germans are whispering, wondering, disbelieving. How many Americans are hidden in the trees? Where are the others? Is this a trap? Is this a decoy force? Is armor waiting beyond the ridge? The ranger hears their voices, scattered, shaken. The psychological fracture has begun. He reloads again. The clip slams home. He rises to fire, but stops, because now he can see them clearly. All of them, rows and rows, hundreds, more than he counted, more than he imagined. He is truly alone, and by sunrise, he will face more than 200 Germans by himself. What happens next will leave both sides speechless. The storm thickened into a wall of white, swallowing sound and distance. Bullets continued to rip through the tree line, chewing bark and snow into clouds of splinters. But the rhythm of the German fire had changed. No longer confident volleys, but wild bursts, scattered rhythms, frantic attempts to locate an enemy they could not see. The ranger pressed his back against the frozen trunk of an ancient pine, lungs heaving, heartbeat hammering against his ribs like a fist against a locked door. His breath came out in heavy clouds of steam. He felt the sting of cold sweat cutting down his spine. His vision pulsed with each heartbeat, tunneling in and out like a flickering searchlight. He knew he had minutes before exhaustion or frostbite claimed control of his muscles. Yet he also knew something else, something far more important. The Germans were now fighting ghosts. The initial shock of the ambush had shattered their momentum. Officers barked contradictory commands. Some ordered an aggressive push forward. Others yelled for fallback positions. MG-42 teams dragged their guns through the snow, repositioning in frantic arcs, barrels jerking violently as they fired blind into the storm. Mortar crews knelt and scrambled to assemble their tubes, hands shaking as they tried to level the base plates on uneven frozen ground. The ranger could feel their confusion. He could almost taste it, raw, metallic, electric, as if it hung in the air like ozone after lightning. This was the moment he had trained for. Not victory, not glory, disruption, chaos, time. He forced himself to move. Every muscle protested. His legs felt carved from wood, stiff and trembling under his weight. He half ran, half fell through the snow toward the ridge line, the deep drifts dragging at his feet like invisible hands. His breath turned to knives in his chest as the cold air tore at him. He threw himself down behind a boulder streaked with ice, rolling to face the tree line again. His eyes scanned the chaos below. German soldiers fanned outward in loose arcs, attempting to surround his position. He watched them slip and lose footing on frozen terrain, bunching together in vulnerable clusters. He raised his rifle and fired again, the recoil slamming into his body. A machine gunner collapsed backward, arms flailing as snow erupted around him. The assistant gunner dove to the ground, clutching the weapon and dragging it out of sight. The ranger's hands moved automatically. Bolt back, clip in, chamber forward. He fired again. Another figure dropped, but he no longer counted kills. Numbers had become meaningless in the face of so many. He was not here to win. He was here to resist long enough to matter, long enough to shift the shape of the battle unfolding far beyond this frozen ridge. Now, the Germans changed tactics. Officers shouted fresh orders, their voices strained and sharp. Two flanking teams separated and began advancing along either side of the ridge, using the terrain for cover. The Rangers' advantage of concealment was thinning. They were adapting. They were closing in. He had minutes at most before they reached angles that would expose him completely. He scanned the slope above him, searching for the next position. Higher ground, a vantage point, a defensible ridge. His eyes locked onto a jagged outcrop of rock and ice about 60 yards uphill, barely visible through the snow. It was steep, nearly vertical in places, but if he could reach it, he could force the Germans to attack upward into open ground. It was his only chance. He pushed himself up and started climbing. Every step was agony. His boots slipped on ice-slick stone. His fingers clawed into frozen cracks for support. Snow and wind lashed his face. The weight of his rifle pulled at his shoulders like lead. Halfway up, he nearly fell when a sheet of snow collapsed beneath him. He slammed his shoulder into the rock, gritting his teeth against the pain. He dragged himself upward, inch by inch, pulling with frozen fingers until finally he heaved over the edge and collapsed onto the plateau above. His chest burned as he lay there, face pressed into the snow, gasping raw air into lungs that felt seared. Below, the Germans advanced, rifles raised, grenades ready. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve and forced himself upright. He braced his rifle on a broken stump, aligning the sights as shapes emerged through the white curtain of snow. He fired. The shot punched through the storm like a cannon crack. A German soldier spun sideways and collapsed. He fired again, hitting another who slid onto his knees before falling face forward. The formation jerked in panic, scattering again, men diving into snowdrifts for cover. For a few moments, silence returned, broken only by the wind. He could feel his pulse behind his eyes. His body trembled violently now, muscles near the edge of failure. He reached into his belt and pulled another clip free. His hand shook so hard he fumbled the loading, nearly dropping it. He grit his teeth and forced his fingers to steady. The clip locked in with a metallic snap. He exhaled, breath quivering. Then he saw them. Dozens of Germans now moving through the pines on the far side of the valley, spreading wide in coordinated arcs, heading uphill. They had understood the topography. They were committing to a full encirclement. This was no longer skirmish. It was a hunt, and he was the prize. He pressed his forehead against the cold wood of the rifle stock. He let the breath out slowly. He knew what came next. He had seen it before in training exercises and war game scenarios. Once surrounded, he would be overwhelmed from multiple angles. Ammunition exhausted, body broken, captured or killed. Yet there was no fear now, only clarity. This was the razor edge where courage transcends survival, where a single heartbeat still mattered. He fired again, targeting the lead element advancing up the right flank. A corporal fell backward, screaming orders as he hit the snow. The line faltered, men cowering behind shattered logs. He shifted aim and fired at the left flank, striking another soldier. More chaos, more delay. The storm churned around him like smoke from artillery. For the Germans below, it was becoming surreal. One rifle, firing with surgical precision, stopping in advance of 200 trained infantrymen. They could not accept what they saw. It violated every logic of war. It defied scale, probability, doctrine. A force that should have swept the ridge clean in minutes was pinned down by a lone ghost in the trees. Minutes passed like hours. Bullets tore into the rocks around him, spraying fragments into his face. A round clipped his shoulder, spinning him sideways. He felt the burn of torn muscle, hot blood freezing instantly against his uniform. He staggered but did not fall. He dragged himself upright and continued firing, each recoil sending pain like electricity down his arm. The storm swallowed his cry. Then the MG-42 opened again, ripping through the snow with a storm of fire. He dove behind a rock, the rounds punching into the stone just inches away, each impact shaking the ground. He could feel the vibration in his bones. He forced himself still, conserving breath, letting the machine gun fire blindly until the barrel overheated and fell silent with a metallic hiss. He emerged again, rifle steady. He fired at the gunners as they scrambled to change barrels, dropping one before the others vanished behind cover. Still they came, more soldiers pouring into the valley, moving in tighter formations now, shields of steel helmets and raised rifles. Officers screamed for grenadiers to move forward. He could see one now, pulling a grenade from his belt, pin already half drawn. He fired. The grenade fell into the snow, rolling under the grenadier's body before detonating and throwing a spray of blood and ice across the slope. He had seconds left before they overran him completely. He reached for his last grenade, clutching the cold metal sphere in his palm. He pulled the pin and waited, counting breaths. The Germans surged upward, dozens now, faces twisted in rage and desperation. He hurled the grenade as far as his strength would allow. It arced downward through the storm, disappearing among the advancing figures. The explosion came like a collapsing mountain, throwing bodies aside, ripping a hole in the formation. Silence again, the longest silence yet, a silence heavy as stone. The Germans who remained froze in place. They stared upward at the ridge, at the lone figure still standing against the storm, blood on his shoulder, rifle shaking in his hands. They saw not a soldier, not an enemy, not a target. They saw defiance given human shape. For the first time, they did not advance. The ranger's vision swam. His legs trembled. He felt himself sway. He pressed a hand against the wound on his shoulder, fingers slick with half-frozen blood. Snowflakes clung to his eyelashes. His rifle hung heavy in his grip. The storm roared in his ears now, drowning all other sound. He realized he was barely standing, body supported only by the rock at his back and the last threads of willpower. He looked down the slope. There were dozens of German soldiers staring up at him now. Men who could have rushed his position and ended the fight in seconds. Yet none moved. None raised a weapon. Their faces were not marked by rage or triumph. They were marked by something else. Awe, confusion, respect, and a question none dared speak aloud. What kind of army produces a man like this? The ranger lowered his rifle slowly, letting the barrel dip toward the snow. He knew he could not fire another shot. He could barely lift his arms. His breath came in shallow gasps. The wind cut across the ridge like a blade. He wondered if he would die standing or collapse first. And then, through the storm, he heard a sound that did not belong to the forest or the snow or the battle. A distant rumble, slow at first, then rising, like thunder rolling across the earth. Engines, American engines. From beyond the far ridge, shapes emerged, tanks grinding through the snow, armored hulls cutting forward with unstoppable weight. Shermans, half-tracked behind them. Infantry moving in long, dark lines. Reinforcements. The Germans heard it too. Heads snapped toward the horizon. Officers shouted rapid orders. The formation broke. Some fell back instantly, scrambling downhill in panic. Others waited in shocked stillness a moment longer, staring up at the figure on the ridge. Then they withdrew in waves, scrambling to regroup before the armored column reached the valley. The ranger watched them vanish into the storm. He slid down the rock to the ground, body folding into the snow. His rifle slipped from his grip. He lay on his back, staring at the sky through the falling snow. The clouds above blurred into white haze. He had held them. Long enough. More than long enough. One heartbeat refusing to stop. He closed his eyes. The storm faded slowly, as if exhausted by its own violence. The snowfall thinned to fine drifting flakes, glimmering faintly in the first pale hints of sunrise. The sky lifted from black to iron gray. The twisted shapes of shattered trees emerged from the white gloom like ghosts returning from the deep. Silence expanded over the valley, not the tense silence of battle, but the vast, empty quiet that follows devastation. A quiet that swallows breath and thought, as if the world itself pauses to absorb what has happened. The ranger lay motionless on the ridge, his body half buried in the accumulating snow. His breathing came shallow and irregular. Pain spread as a diffuse numbness rather than a sharp wound, as if his nerves were shutting down to preserve whatever life remained. His face was pale, lips blue, eyes barely open beneath frost-dusted lashes. He did not know whether minutes or hours had passed since the last shot. Time had dissolved. All that existed was the cold and the distant vibration of engines moving closer. Below, the armored column advanced with slow inevitability. Shermans ground through drifts of snow, treads clanking, steel hulls coated in ice and mud. Infantry marched behind them, rifles slung low, boots crunching through the crusted snow. Medics jogged forward, Red Cross armbands bright against dark wool uniforms. Officers raised field glasses and scanned the ridgeline. The first tank halted, engine idling in deep metallic rumble. A lieutenant stepped down and ran ahead, boots slipping on frozen ground. When he reached the base of the ridge, he saw the field, bodies, hundreds of footprints, scattered equipment, torn branches, bullet-scarred trees. The snow stained dark where blood had melted through. He raised his binoculars and peered upward. A single figure, barely visible, leaning against a rock at the crest. The officers signaled frantically, and a group of soldiers sprinted up the slope, slipping, clawing their way through snow as urgency tightened around their throats. They moved without formation, without caution. No one expected resistance now. No one could imagine another enemy left standing on this ridge. When they reached him, they stopped, stunned into stillness. The ranger sat upright, back against the rock, rifle resting loosely across his lap. His eyes opened in a narrow squint, watching them with the dull clarity of someone still halfway inside death's doorway. Blood had frozen into a dark crust along his shoulder and torso. His gloved hands lay limp and motionless as if carved from stone. Snowflakes clung to his eyelashes like frost on broken glass. For a long moment, no one spoke. The soldiers looked at him, then down the valley below, tracing the paths of German retreat, seeing evidence of a battle so asymmetric it bordered on the impossible. They searched the ridge for other bodies. They found none. They searched the snow for additional American positions, foxholes, supporting fire teams, heavy weapons placements. There was nothing. Just one man, one rifle, and the footprints of 200 who had come to kill him and left in silence instead. The lieutenant approached slowly, and knelt in the snow beside him. He spoke softly, leaning close so the wind would not steal the words. The ranger did not respond immediately. His eyes flicked toward the officer, then toward the valley below, as if still expecting the enemy to return at any moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was little more than a breath, raw, cracked, barely shaped into sound. "Do we hold?" The officer swallowed, feeling his throat tighten. He nodded. "You did." The ranger's head leaned back against the rock. His eyes drifted closed. His chest rose and fell in a slow, fragile rhythm. A medic pushed forward, checking his pulse, feeling for warmth beneath layers of frozen fabric. He shouted for a stretcher. The soldiers moved with fierce urgency, cutting away his gear, lifting him with careful hands. As they carried him down the ridge, the medic whispered something the others would never forget. "This man should be dead." The valley behind them remained still and empty. No sound of German fire returned. The storm had taken the last echoes of war. The Germans had withdrawn in long, silent lines, moving back through the forest with faces lowered and weapons slack in their hands. Their officers spoke little. There was no anger now, no shouts of orders, no threats of disciplinary action. Something deeper had broken in them. Not morale, but certainty. They had outnumbered the enemy 200 to 1. They had possessed superior position, firepower, and encirclement. By every law of war, the fight should have lasted minutes, not hours. Yet they had watched an entire company stall in fear and confusion before a single unseen rifleman whose will refuse to yield. Rumors spread among the ranks like fire in dry grass. Someone said the American was a sniper from a legendary Ranger battalion. Someone else said he had been trained by the Devil's Brigade. Others insisted he could not have been human. No one could endure such punishment and continue fighting with such precision. Some whispered that they had seen him through the snow, standing unflinching while bullets split the trees around him. One young private swore he saw the ranger lower his rifle voluntarily, choosing not to fire the final shot. Whether any of it was true no longer mattered. What mattered was what they felt. Not victory, not hatred, not even fear. Respect. It was a word rarely spoken in war. Yet as they marched away through the blizzard, soldiers touched helmets solemnly, nodding toward the ridge hidden behind the curtain of snow. In their silence lay the deepest tribute. One man had changed the shape of the battle, and in doing so, he had changed them. Back behind American lines, the ranger was delivered to a field surgical station. Doctors fought to pull him back from the edge, packed wounds with heated compresses, repaired torn tissue, transferred blood from volunteers who lined up outside the tent without being asked. A chaplain waited nearby, prepared to speak last rites if the pulse faltered. The ranger drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring numbers as if calculating firing angles, sometimes whispering the names of comrades lost earlier in the campaign. He never asked to be praised. He never asked for recognition. He had done what duty demanded, nothing more. When he finally stabilized, a colonel visited his bedside with a military report in hand. It detailed everything found at the ridge: the German ammunition expenditures, the disrupted advance, the stalled timetable that had allowed Allied columns to regroup and seal a breach that might have folded the entire front. Analysts estimated that thousands of American lives were saved because a single soldier refused to fall back. The colonel prepared to read the citation for a medal. Before he could speak, the ranger opened his eyes. "How many made it out?" he whispered. The colonel hesitated, unsure what he meant. "On our side," the ranger said, breath shallow. "How many got away because of the delay?" The colonel answered quietly, "More than anyone expected." The ranger nodded once. His eyes closed again, sinking into a sleep that looked like surrender but was simply exhaustion claiming its debt. News traveled faster than truth. Within days, commanders spoke in hushed tones about the lone ranger who had held 200 Germans. Within weeks, the story spread through battalions like a spark caught on gasoline. A legend built from fact, sharpened by awe. Some embellished it until it sounded impossible. Others swore it was accurate down to the last bullet. But every retelling carried the same core. One man had stood, and an army had stopped. On the German side, officers writing after the war reflected on the incident with a different tone. They described the moment when their troops, trained for aggression and victory, found themselves unable to advance another step. They described the unsettling sensation of feeling the presence of a single enemy like a wall of steel. They described an erosion of certainty, a collapse of the myth that numbers decide destiny. Diaries recovered after the war included passages written in careful, shaken handwriting. We thought we were fighting a soldier. We discovered we were fighting a conviction. No artillery, no machine guns, one rifle. And we failed. We could have killed him, but we did not. We could not. To historians, the incident was a tactical footnote, a marginal episode inside a massive war, a tiny spark against the inferno of the Battle of the Bulge. But to those who were there, on both sides, it became something more. An anchor point of meaning in a world collapsing into chaos. A reminder that war is not won only by formations and machines. It is won by human will. When the war ended months later, the Ranger returned home, not to parades or fanfare, but to quiet farmland far from the fractured fields of Europe. He walked with a slight limp, carrying scars that ached when the cold returned. He rarely spoke about the ridge or the storm. When asked, he dismissed it with simple words, "I did what I had to." People assumed humility, but the truth was deeper. He did not consider himself a hero. He considered himself lucky to have survived. The men who served with him knew better. They wrote letters, gave testimony, told his story whenever asked. The Germans who survived that morning carried the memory into civilian life, speaking of the American who had changed their view of war. Some years later, a German veteran sent a letter through the Red Cross asking for the Ranger's name. Not to honor an enemy, he wrote, but to thank a man who taught him something essential before the end. The letter was placed unread in a military archive, misplaced for decades. Only long after both men were gone did historians uncover it. It contained only one sentence: "War ends when respect begins." The valley where the battle occurred remains quiet now. The forest has regrown. Snow falls each winter across the ridge the way it did that morning, soft and white, burying the scars of violence beneath a clean surface. There are no monuments, no statues, no plaques, only trees, wind, and silence. Yet sometimes hikers stop and listen, to the hush of branches, to the distant rumble of storms rolling over the Ardennes, to the echo of something unspoken that lingers in the air like a memory refusing to fade. Some wars are won by armies, but some by a single heartbeat refusing to stop. And on that morning in the Ardennes, when the storm closed around one man standing alone, something changed in the souls of those who witnessed it. The sound of gunfire was replaced by silence. Enemies stood still not in fear, but in recognition. And in that silence lay a truth carved deeper than any bullet could reach. Courage is louder than weapons. Honor is stronger than numbers. And sometimes the fate of thousands rests on the shoulders of one. When the snow settled, the ridge stood empty. But the echo remained. The echo of a rifle that refused to fall silent. The echo of footsteps retreating not in victory, but in respect. The echo of war ending, not with surrender, but with understanding. Because on that day, in a frozen forest where death seemed certain, a lone American ranger proved something history too often forgets. Humanity can survive even the heart of war. And the silence that followed spoke louder than all the guns in Europe.